Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back, tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. The first arrow struck the porch post before dawn, its feathers trembling in the candlelight that leaked through the cabin window. Elias Dern stood barefoot on the pine floorboards, his rifle leveled at the door, breath shallow as frost drifted from his lips. Outside, horses snorted in the fog, many of them. The rhythmic hum of war chants rose like something ancient waking from the earth. He counted voices until his gut turned cold. Dozens, maybe 80 men. The Comanche were here. Behind him, in the corner of the one-room cabin, the little girl he'd taken in 2 nights ago trembled beneath his coat. Her name was Ayanna. She was maybe 12. Her small brown hands clutched the locket he'd given her, a simple silver thing that used to belong to his late wife. Elias's knuckles whitened around the rifle. He'd offered shelter to a wounded child, and now her father, Chief Ten Skies, had brought his entire war band to his doorstep. The wind carried the sound of hoofbeats and fury. Elias whispered not a prayer, but a plea to the dawn, "Lord, please, don't let her see me die." The cabin walls creaked under the pressure of the cold morning wind, but the sound of horses circling drowned everything. Elias peeked through a crack between the boards. Shadows moved like smoke through the mesquite. He saw their war paint, red stripes across cheeks, black rings around eyes. The fire from their torches flickered, outlining the faces of men who'd burned settlements to ashes. Ten Skies himself sat astride a white stallion, a hawk feather trembling in his hair, a rifle laid across his knees like a promise waiting to be kept. Ayanna stirred. "He is my father," she whispered. Her voice carried fear and something else, shame. Elias turned to her, pressing a finger to his lips. "Ayanna, look at me," he said quietly. "I ain't gonna let them take you." She shook her head, tears slicing clean lines down her dusty face. "He will kill you." Elias smiled faintly, a lopsided smile of a man too tired to lie. "Probably. But not before the sun comes up." The wind whistled through bullet holes patched with cloth and tar. Somewhere in the dark, a single drum began to beat, slow and heavy. It sounded like a heart preparing for war. The beating drum stopped suddenly, replaced by a voice, deep, calm, booming across the distance. "White man," the voice called, "send the girl out and we spare your life." Ten Skies. Elias stepped closer to the door, his boots brushing sawdust. He felt Ayanna's grip tighten on his sleeve. "He says that every time," she whispered. "He will not spare you." Elias didn't blink. His heart sounded as loud in his chest as the rifle hammer cocking back. "Your daughter's safe here," he shouted through the door. "She's hurt. She needs rest, not bloodshed." Laughter erupted outside, sharp, cruel laughter from 50 throats. The chief replied, voice steady as a mountain, "She rests in my camp, not in a white man's house." Silence fell, heavy as snow. Elias turned back, his eyes finding the girl's. For the first time since she'd arrived, she looked at him with anger. "You should not have helped me," she said. The words stung sharper than any bullet. Elias knelt beside her. "Maybe not. But I'll die better helping than living scared." Her breath hitched. Outside, the horses stopped moving. Then, the soft metallic click of a rifle bolt echoed from beyond the porch. Elias slid the iron latch into place. The cabin had survived bandits, storms, and winters, but now it felt no stronger than a shell on the beach before a wave. He moved to the window, his breath fogging the cracked glass. The silhouettes of armed riders tightened into formation, circling tighter. Ayanna was crying silently. He wanted to say something kind, but words were heavy, useless now. He thought of his wife, years gone, her grave marked by a single red stone near the river. He thought of all the times he'd turned strangers away because it was safer not to care. But when he saw Ayanna half dead in the canyon 2 nights ago, bleeding and terrified, he'd carried her home instead of turning his horse. Maybe this was his punishment, or his redemption. Outside, Ten Skies raised his hand. A torch left a trail of sparks as it arced through the dim light, landing against the dry sidewall of Elias's barn. Fire bloomed. The horses shrieked. Iona screamed. Elias shoved the window open, fired once, the sound cracking through the dawn, and one of the men fell backward into the dirt. When he reloaded, the whole line of riders charged. They came like thunder, the ground shaking under hooves, the world splitting between light and smoke. Elias fired again and again, each shot answering the scream of horses and men. Bullets tore through wood, splinters slicing his face. Iona ducked under the table, hands clamped over her ears. The air filled with gunpowder and fire. Elias fought like a man who'd already died once. The door shuddered with every hit. The barn collapsed, flames clawing up toward the sky like they were alive. He reloaded, breath ragged, sweat and ash mingling on his skin. Then came a pause, sudden, eerie stillness. A whistle pierced the smoke. When it cleared, 10 skies stood 15 yards away, his rifle aimed directly through the doorway. "She is mine," the chief said. Iona stepped out from her hiding place, eyes wide with something between terror and loyalty. "If I go," she whispered, "they'll spare you." Elias's heart cracked open. He didn't answer. He lifted his rifle and met the chief's gaze. For one eternal moment, dawn painted both men in the same blood-red light. Fathers, protectors, enemies. Iona screamed, the rifle roared, and the world burst into fire and silence. 2 days before the siege, the air in Red Lantern Canyon had tasted of copper and rain, the kind that never fell. Elias Dern was riding home from town, his mule cart loaded with salt pork and rifle cartridges, when he saw the vultures. They floated in the heat above the rocks, circling a narrow gully where the world slid into shadow. He dismounted slow, hand on pistol, eyes narrowed against the glare. The sand was streaked with blood, fresh, dark, running downhill. Then he saw her, a girl, barely breathing, tangled in brush and thorn. Her ankle was gashed open, her face half hidden by braided hair stiff with dust and blood. Around her lay spent cartridges and the bodies of 2 men, white men. Elias crouched beside the girl, pressed his ear near her mouth, heard the shallow rasp of life. She was someone's daughter, someone's war. Gravel shifted behind him, his revolver swung up in reflex, but nothing moved except wind through the canyon. He should have left her. He knew it. The frontier had a rule, don't carry strangers' burdens. But as she whispered something in Comanche, words soaked with pain, he lifted her into his arms anyway and started toward home. By dusk, the girl had woken inside his cabin. Her eyes darted around, wild and unsure, and when Elias offered her water, she flinched like the tin cup might bite. He'd cleaned the wound, wrapped it tight, and fetched a blanket from his late wife's trunk. "You're safe now," he said, but she didn't seem to understand, or maybe she did, and just didn't believe him. The fire burned low, smelling of juniper and smoke. "Name's Elias," he said quietly. "Elias Dern." "You." The girl hesitated. "Iona." Her voice cracked like dry earth. "Where's your family?" he asked and instantly regretted it. The way her shoulders tensed told him enough. "Gone," she said finally. "They found us by mistake. I ran." She looked away, eyes shining against the firelight. Elias frowned. The 2 dead men in the canyon hadn't looked like soldiers. Rustlers, maybe. Slave hunters, more likely. He'd seen what they did to young indigenous girls. His stomach twisted. He wanted to ask where her father was, but something, like a whisper from the air, told him not to. "You stay the night," he said instead. "Tomorrow, I'll get you to the mission." But she shook her head. "No mission," she whispered. "He will find me." That night, Elias dreamed of fire on the horizon. He hadn't dreamed in years. When he woke, the room was quiet except for Iona's restless breathing and the pops from the fire dying in the hearth. He turned toward the window, black sky, stars scattered like cold ash. Somewhere, far off, a coyote howled. He sat up and listened. Another sound followed, a rhythm, distant but deliberate, like a drum played under the earth. His pulse stuttered. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, scanning the plains. Only darkness and emptiness. No riders, no flames, no wind. Still, the sound clung to him. Inside, Ayana murmured in her sleep, words he couldn't understand but tones he did, sorrow and warning braided together. As he lay back down, he wondered if she was dreaming of him, or of someone coming for her. Morning brought silence again, but not peace. She woke before sunrise, limping, gathering her small bundle of belongings, a deerskin pouch, a carved figurine of a hawk, and a folded piece of cloth painted with red and blue symbols. When Elias asked what it was, she said only, "My clan's shadow." He didn't know then that it was a war banner. By midday, they had packed supplies, dried meat, water, a little salt, and hitched the mule for the ride to the nearest mission, 6 miles east. The sun hung heavy, pressing down on them. Ayana sat in the wagon, still pale, her foot bound in clean cloth. Elias drove in silence, glancing at her now and then. "You sure you don't want to tell me who's after you?" he asked finally. Her answer came soft. "If I tell, you will die." He chuckled dryly. "A lot of people tried that already." She looked at him then, steady and unreadable. "You killed 2 men," she said. He tensed. "You saw that?" She nodded. "They tried to take my spirit. You gave it back." He didn't know what to say. Soon the canyon walls opened to the plains. That vast loneliness, the kind that both frees and crushes a man, spread before them. For the first time, Elias thought he saw movement on the ridge, riders, distant, vanishing into sun glare. He blinked. They were gone. Maybe just heat waves. Ayana turned her head, sensing it too. "They are coming," she whispered. "My father will not stop until he finds me." Elias gripped the reins tighter. When they reached the split in the trail, one way to the mission, the other back toward Red Lantern Canyon, Ayana suddenly grabbed his arm. "Please," she said, her voice trembling. "Don't leave me there. The priests will tell him. They trade secrets for silver." Elias stared at the crossroads. The sun burned high, the air sharp with dust. His whole life had been built around one rule: avoid other people's wars. He'd survived border raids, land feuds, even the fever that took his wife. But this was something else, a battle that had started long before he ever saw the girl bleeding in the dirt. He looked at her, saw the bruises on her arms, the scar under her eye, the way she clutched that cloth with her clan symbols as though it was the last piece of her soul. Finally, he clicked the reins and turned the mule the other way. "All right," he said quietly. "You'll stay with me for now." Ayana's eyes softened but didn't lose their warning. Somewhere far behind them, faint but rising, came that same drumbeat from the night before. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of smoke and distant horses. The next morning bled into the plains in thin streaks of pale yellow and ash blue. Elias woke before the light fully broke, his back aching from the hard cot. Ayana was already outside, kneeling near the creek that cut through his property, washing her hands in the cold water like it made her invisible. She looked smaller in the daylight, thinner, but there was a stillness in her movements, deliberate, ceremonial. Elias stepped onto the porch, coffee tin in hand. The smell of the grounds hit the raw air. "You sleep any?" he called. She nodded slightly, though the dark hollows under her eyes told otherwise. "Dreams?" he asked. She hesitated, then said, "I saw my father in the smoke. He was walking through fire, calling for me." Elias sipped the bitter brew. "Maybe it's your mind playing tricks." But in truth, he'd heard things last night. Whispers carried by the wind, voices too measured to belong to coyotes. The ranch was silent now, except for the steady bubbling of the creek and the distant call of hawks. Yet the silence didn't soothe him. It crouched, waiting. It felt like being watched by something that always waited for dawn to kill. After breakfast, Elias repaired the fence by the pasture, but his eyes kept drifting toward the horizon. The prairie had always been his friend, wide, predictable, empty, but today, it pulsed with unease. Ayana stayed near the stable, feeding the colt he'd raised from birth. "You shouldn't be out here," he said when he caught her. "There's rattlers and men worse than that." She smiled faintly, a strange calm in her eyes. "Men are worse than snakes," she said. The way she spoke, measured, patient, made him feel like she'd already seen more life than he ever would. When she noticed his gaze, she touched the painted cloth again, the clan's shadow. Elias asked, "Your father's one of the chiefs, ain't he?" She paused. 10 skies, she said softly. The name turned the air cold. Elias froze mid-hammer. He'd heard the legends whispered around fires by trappers and scouts, tales of a war leader whose shadow stretched across the plains. Some said he could vanish into smoke, that he'd spared no settlements. Elias forced a grin. Well, that's just swell. But inside, the seed of fear took root. 10 skies wasn't just a man. He was half myth, half vengeance breathing. By mid-afternoon, Ayana was asleep near the fire. Elias sat on the porch, reloading shells one by one, the metallic clicks echoing through the dry air. There was comfort in the routine, something solid to hold on to. His whole life, he'd been a man nobody remembered. A traitor, a failed rancher, a widower hiding from everything that reminded him of loss. Now, somehow, he'd found himself in the middle of a story that stretched beyond his name. He could have delivered the girl, washed his hands of it, gone back to solitude. But the plains had grown too quiet lately, too still. Even the birds kept their distance. He thought about 10 skies, about what kind of father would bring 80 men to retrieve a single child. Was it pride? Revenge? He swallowed a mouthful of stale coffee and told himself none of it mattered. But deep down it did. Something old stirred inside him, a kind of buried guilt for every time he'd stood by and done nothing. Maybe this was his one chance to do something different, something right. He didn't realize then that doing right would damn him all the same. That night, the wind picked up across the plains. It wasn't the usual restless kind that whistled through fence posts. It hummed low, pulsing, almost human. Ayana sat by the fire again, tracing patterns in the dirt with a piece of charcoal. Elias watched her, uneasy. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She looked up, eyes reflecting the flames. "A warning," she said. The sketch looked like a circle surrounded by marks, tiny stick figures on horseback. At its center, a single house. His stomach dropped when he realized what it was. "You saw this in your dreams?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "They are close. My father sends his spirit before his horses. If you stay, you will see the smoke soon." Elias rubbed his temples. "I ain't running from a man's shadow, girl." She met his eyes, not scared, not pleading, just tired. "It's not a shadow," she said. "It's his anger." Outside, something slammed against the barn wall, once, twice. Elias grabbed his rifle, motioning her back. He stepped into the dark, only to find a hawk feather nailed to his door. It fluttered in the night wind, black at the tip, red at the base. A sign. The hunt had begun. Sleep mocked him that night. Every time Elias closed his eyes, he heard drums muffled by distance, each beat like a countdown in the dirt. He checked the rifle again, the revolver again, as if the action itself could hold fear at bay. Near dawn, he found Ayana sitting awake by the cold ashes of the fire. "He's close," she said. Her voice was quiet, but her eyes were dry, resolute. "Run if you must." Elias knelt beside her. "You want me to leave you?" "No," she said gently. "I want you to live." That tore something open in him, something long walled off by years of silence. "I ain't leaving," he said. "A man's got to face what rides for him." The first rays of sun drew a harsh gold edge across the horizon. For a moment, the prairie looked stripped bare, ancient and watchful. Behind that beauty, danger moved, shadows flickering just beyond sight. Elias rested a hand on the wood grain of his door and realized he wasn't just defending a girl anymore. He was drawing a line between guilt and grace, between the sins of the past and the fire yet to come. And fire, he knew, was patient. The sun hung heavy that morning, gorged on the dust of the prairie. Elias stood by the corral, watching his horses shift uneasily. Even the wind seemed to breathe differently, short, fast, like a creature hiding from something it sensed long before men could. Ayana was on the porch, her face pale beneath her tangled hair, eyes fixed on the horizon. She didn't speak until he came close. "They are testing the ground," she murmured. They always do that before they strike. He frowned, glancing past her shoulder. You mean scouts? She nodded. And watchers. They count how many times you go outside, how often you look up. Elias's jaw tightened. He'd been a soldier once, years back during a border campaign, but hearing that truth from the lips of a child chilled him in a way war never had. When she turned toward him, her gaze softened. My father believes mercy is weakness. When my mother died, he said her kindness killed her. Elias rubbed his jaw, eyes distant. Sounds like a man who's never forgiven the world for being cruel. She looked away, whispering, No, he's just afraid it will take me the same way. Somewhere far off, a hawk screamed unanswered. The afternoon passed slow, stretched thin by heat and worry. Elias tried keeping busy, checking rifle sights, fixing a broken hinge on the barn door, but his thoughts crawled backward, toward memories he'd buried in silence. He still remembered the scent of lavender when his wife, Mara, used to braid her hair, the way she'd press flowers between the pages of her Bible though the desert never offered many. She'd believed kindness could heal anything. And she died for it, shot by raiders he'd been too far away to stop. That guilt had hollowed him out. Now, watching Ayanna limp through the yard, clutching the same locket that had once hung from Mara's neck, Elias felt the past clawing for him. Maybe this wasn't coincidence. Maybe the world was handing him one last chance to do right by someone helpless, broken. Ayanna caught him staring. You loved her, she said simply. Yes, Elias murmured. And I failed her. Then don't fail me. Her voice wasn't pleading, it was command. He blinked, almost startled by how old she seemed in that moment. Then she said something else, quiet as wind over dry grass. My father's not coming to take me. He's coming to punish you. At dusk, Elias sat by the creek sharpening his knife while Ayanna hummed a low tune by the cabin. The melody rose and fell like morning. What is that? He asked. She hesitated. A song for crossing spirits. It tells them where to go. You planning on dying on me, girl? He said, forcing a smirk. She didn't smile. The song helps even the lost find their way. You might need it too. He watched her, unsettled. The light dimmed slower here, shadows crawling out of the gulch like smoke. Coyotes started then, their cries twisting into something almost human. Elias sheathed the knife and stood. Come inside. Night don't sit kindly this time of year. She obeyed, but before ducking into the doorway she whispered, When they come, don't shoot first. He frowned. That's poor advice in my experience. But she shook her head. If you shed blood before sunrise, his spirit will bind to yours. Then it won't end when he dies. Elias exhaled, muttering, superstition. Yet her eyes, dull knowing, made him pause. He looked out once more. Across the horizon, a faint red shimmer pulsed like embers beneath the sky. Smoke, too controlled to be natural. Scouts indeed. Later that night, a knock came, gentle, deliberate. Elias froze mid-step, hand hovering near the rifle. No one knocked in these parts. Ayanna whispered, Don't open it. But the voice outside was calm, steady, and low. Elias Dern. My name's Sergeant Kip. Out of Fort Hollis. We've been tracking a Comanche party west of here. Mind if we come in? He stiffened. That name woke a dusty memory. Kip, a soldier he'd served alongside years ago, cruel behind his grin. Elias squinted through the slit in the wall. Torchlight flickered on 3 mounted men in blue coats, faces sharp as blades. Still, something was wrong. Ayanna shook her head violently. Not soldiers, she whispered. Their horses are painted. Elias's stomach dropped. He shouted, Not tonight, Sergeant. Ride on. One of them laughed, too high, too wild, and in the next second the world exploded. Gunfire split the dark. Bullets punched through the walls, splintering wood inches from Ayanna's head. Elias dove, dragging her behind the hearth. The fire scattered sparks across the floor. He fired twice out the window. 2 silhouettes fell from their saddles, but when he looked again, there were no uniforms. Only war paint and shadows moving closer through the flickering light. The shooting stopped as suddenly as it began. Only smoke and the sound of a dying horse hung in the air. Elias pressed his back to the wall, heart hammering. Ayana's breath came shallow, her hands slick with sweat. "Scouts," he hissed. "They found us." She nodded slowly. "My father knows where we are now." He touched her shoulder gently. "Then we've got to move before dawn." She looked up, shaking her head. "Running doesn't change where the sun rises." He wanted to argue, but then he heard it again, the distant drumbeat, faint yet unmistakable, threading through the wind. One beat, pause, two beats, pause. A signal. Elias clenched his jaw. The war party would follow by morning. "Get some rest," he said, though neither of them slept. He stood guard by the door, the rifle balanced loosely across his palms, eyes fixed on the stars through the cracks in the wall. Each constellation looked like a mark carved across the sky for men doomed to remember their sins. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, he caught himself whispering Mara's name, half prayer, half goodbye. Tomorrow would break with fire. He knew it. The sound of the drum said everything words never would. When morning came, the sun rose red, as if it had been watching the night burn. Elias stood on the porch gripping a half-empty rifle. The prairie breathed smoke. Far off, thin trails of fire curved upward where grass still smoldered. Ayana joined him, her blanket draped across her shoulders, hair tangled with ash. The wind pressed at their faces, heavy with the scent of charred sage. "They burned the ridge," Elias muttered. "Why light their own hunting grounds?" Ayana's eyes flicked toward the horizon. "They burn to make the spirits walk ahead of them. The smoke blinds their enemies and feeds their courage." He swallowed hard, scanning the endless plain. "That means they'll be here before sundown." She didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on the horizon, her lips murmuring something that sounded like a prayer wrapped inside a warning. Elias turned back inside, checked the ammunition crate. 12 shells, 2 pistols, a knife, and not much else. He'd faced death before, but never like this, where every breath he took felt borrowed from someone else's story. "We'll make a stand," he said, mostly to convince himself. Ayana quietly tied her deer-hide pouch to her belt and whispered, "Stands always fall, but sometimes they're remembered." Mid-morning heat shimmered atop the plains while Elias fortified what passed for his home. He flipped the table, propped barrels behind it, and sealed the west windows with planks. Each nail he drove echoed across the stillness. Between blows, he caught glimpses of Ayana moving around softly, gathering candles, filling a basin, lining powder horns without being told. She worked like someone reliving a memory, not learning a skill. "You done this before?" he asked. She shrugged. "My mother hid us from Pawnee raiders when I was small. We survived 6 nights before my father rode in." A strange softness crossed her face, half fierce, half grieving. He said fear teaches truth. "I learned that truth is cruel." Elias paused, studying her, then said quietly, "Sometimes fear teaches courage too." She looked up, eyes distant. "Then we both have much to learn before dark." The simplicity of it broke something open inside him. He nodded once. She went to the porch, spreading a small line of salt across the threshold. "What's that for?" he asked. "To remind the spirits which side of the door they belong on." He didn't laugh. After last night's ghosts in uniform, he wasn't sure there were sides anymore. By afternoon, the sky dimmed strangely, a bronze haze settling over the plains from the burning ridge. It wasn't yet sunset, yet the world already seemed half afraid of the dark it knew was coming. Elias stood outside with his spyglass, scanning every flicker and shadow, reading shapes out of dust. He caught hints of riders, distant and small, like insects against the glare. "They're circling," he muttered, "counting distance." Ayana appeared beside him, clutching her pouch. "He doesn't wait for courage," she said. "He waits for silence. When the land goes quiet, the first arrow flies." They both listened. No birdsong, even the crickets had ceased. The silence wasn't peace, it was pressure, thick enough to choke on. In the midst of it, Elias said, "You talk like you know how he thinks." Her expression didn't change. "I do. He taught me before I ran." That sentence hung like smoke between them. Elias lowered the glass, staring at her. "Why'd you run, Ayanna?" She hesitated, then whispered, "He wanted me to do what my mother refused." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. "He wanted me to become like him." The wind shifted sharply, like even it couldn't bear the truth she spoke. Elias said nothing for a long moment, watching as the horizon dimmed further into bruised gold. He wanted to ask what that meant, what 10 skies had demanded of his daughter, but the words died behind the tightness in his throat. Whatever she'd fled from, whatever her father had turned her into, it wasn't his to judge. "Well," he said finally, voice low, "you ran far enough to find me, and that's trouble enough." She smiled faintly. "You think the world gives us choices where to fall?" He laughed, a broken sound more tired than amused. "Guess not. But we still decide how we stand back up." Around them, the air carried static, dry sparks brushing through the sage. Somewhere out of sight, a horse neighed, sharp and nervous. Elias and Ayanna both turned. A second later, an arrow cut through the sky and landed inches from Elias's boot, its tip still wet, coated with red pigment that steamed where it struck dirt. Ayanna stared down at it. "That's their sign," she said softly. "No more talk. The ground is chosen." Elias lifted his rifle, eyes narrowing. "Then let's see if the ground agrees." From far away came an answering cry, low, long, and hungry. The first wave came before sundown, 4 riders breaking from the northern brush, faces painted bone white, charging through the dust. Elias fired twice, dropping one. The second shot went wide, splintering a fence post. Ayanna reloaded without flinching, her small hands moving faster than fear. One rider leapt from his horse, sprinting toward the barn, blade raised. Elias met him halfway, the rifle but catching bone with a sick thud. The man fell, rolling into dirt. Elias grabbed his pistol, fired once more. Silence returned as sudden as the burst of violence. 2 bodies lay still, their horses retreating into the open plain. Ayanna knelt beside a broken arrow, snapping it clean. "They weren't meant to win," she said. "They were meant to see how ready you are." Elias exhaled harshly, his pulse shaking through every vein. "Then I reckon they saw just fine." She nodded grimly. "Now, he'll come himself." The red sun touched the horizon, melting into smoke. Elias stood straight, anchoring his feet in the dirt as the first stars blinked alive. "Then he'll find me waiting," he said. Behind him, the girl whispered a prayer, half Comanche, half something else. The wind answered her, whispering back like recognition. Darkness fell heavy and fast, swallowing color and mercy alike. The moon hid behind smoke, and the world turned to shapes of red and black. Elias lit one lantern and hung it low near the hearth. Too much light would draw them faster. The cabin smelled of oil and iron, gunpowder ready in the pan. Ayanna sat cross-legged before the fire, mixing something in a clay bowl, fine white ash with drops of water. "What's that for?" Elias asked. "For courage," she said softly. "It covers the smell of fear." She smeared some of it under her eyes before handing him the bowl. He hesitated, then dabbed it across his own cheeks. The ash felt cool, grounding. Outside, a coyote screamed, cut short mid-yelp. Ayanna whispered, "They are close." Elias moved to the window slit, saw flickers, then movement, riders sliding like shadows through the dust. He counted more than 20. Too many. "When I say run," he told her, "head for the cellar and lock the door." She shook her head. "If I hide, he'll think you took me." "You think I care what he thinks?" he snapped. She looked at him then, eyes small, fierce, old. "You will, before dawn." The first cry came like thunder rolling across glass. Arrows slammed into the cabin walls. Elias fired through the slit, crack, recoil, smoke, and one figure crumpled. Another arrow shattered the lantern, plunging them into half-dark. The room pulsed with muzzle flashes, blue sparks of death lighting Ayanna's face. She crouched and loaded slow, precise, each move sharp as prayer. The wall groaned under steady hits. "They'll smoke us out," Elias muttered, grabbing the water pail and dousing the doorframe. He remembered the screams of other nights, other fires, losing everything once before. It couldn't happen again. He wouldn't let it. Outside, war cries rose, layered, harmonized, alive. The door trembled. Elias braced against it, pushing with all his weight. When it burst open, he fired point-blank into the first body that lunged through. The man fell without a sound, face painted red from chin to eye. Elias kicked the corpse aside, slammed the door again, heart stuttering. "They won't stop," Ayanna said. Her tone wasn't despair, it was fact. "Then neither will I," Elias growled. Their eyes met, and in that thin moment between shots, they both understood it. The line between protection and vengeance was starting to blur. Seconds stretched into forever. Smoke filled the air, thick, choking. Elias coughed, tasting fire on his tongue. The war cries outside turned to chanting, rhythmic, relentless. Through the flicker, Ayanna began chanting too, but hers wasn't for war. Her voice was low, carrying something that vibrated deep into the timbers. Her eyes rolled faintly as she repeated words in Comanche he didn't know. "Hey!" He grabbed her shoulder. "Stop that, what are you doing?" She whispered, "Calling my mother's spirit." "That won't stop bullets," he hissed. She met his stare. "No, but it might stop him." The walls shook, another log split and fell open, feeding more smoke inside. Elias aimed through the hole and fired. A scream answered back. "They're closing the circle," Ayanna said. "If the fire surrounds us, the wind will betray you. It always turns inward before dawn." Elias didn't fully grasp her meaning, but the word inward lodged like a nail in his soul. Suddenly, the wind outside changed, gusting toward them instead of away. The air sucked heat through the cracks, funneling the smoke into their lungs. Elias tore his sleeve, wrapped it around Ayanna's mouth. "Get to the cellar." "And you?" "I'll buy us some air," he rasped, reloading. He burst through the cabin door, spinning into the chaos outside. The world glowed red from scattered fires, the ground swaying under hooves and shouts. Bullets zipped through the smoke, carving the air into ribbons. Elias's rifle barked, dropping a shape near the corral. Another man charged with a tomahawk, swinging wide. Elias ducked, jammed his pistol under the man's ribs, fired. The smell, blood, burnt powder, horse sweat, melded into madness. Someone shouted his name. "Elias!" The voice wasn't Ayanna's. It was deep, echoing, familiar. From out of the haze, 10 skies rode forward, tall, regal, eyes glowing silver in the moonlight. He wore no armor, only a robe of dark leather painted with white crescents. His rifle rested across his saddle, untouched. "You took what is mine," he called. Elias raised his weapon. "She ain't yours to take." The chief smiled, a quiet, terrible expression. "You don't understand. My daughter is a gift to the spirits. You kept her from her purpose." Elias's stomach turned. "She's a child." "She is the promise," 10 skies said coldly. Then he pointed his rifle skyward, fired once, and every rider around him howled like wolves at the same command. The world spun into chaos again. Horses thundered, fire spread. Elias ran toward the barn, planting rounds as he went. He reached the trough, dropped behind it for cover. Above the roar, Ayanna's voice cried out from the cabin, a sound that tore through him. "Elias!" He turned just in time to see the roof catch. Flames leapt fast, devouring everything they'd built. "No!" He sprinted back, bursting into the doorway choked with smoke. Ayanna stood in the corner, her hands outstretched toward the ceiling, whispering words over and over. The heat blistered skin and thought alike. "Ayanna, move!" he shouted, grabbing her. She fought him with a wild strength, screaming in her language, tears evaporating before they fell. "He is here!" she cried. Outside, the rhythm of hooves stopped. 10 skies' voice rolled through the firelight, calm and final. "White man, you cannot save her. Step aside." Elias pulled Ayanna toward the cellar, pain burning every nerve. "I ain't your enemy," he shouted. "You are her delay," the chief replied. Another volley of arrows struck the roof. The cabin groaned, surrendering to the blaze. Ayanna clutched his arm. "If you kill him," she whispered, shaking, "you end both of us." The cabin crumbled as if the fire itself was breathing purpose into its destruction. Elias dragged Ayanna through smoke and falling beams, coughing until his throat bled. When the retreating flames opened a path, he fell hard against the dirt. Ayanna landed beside him, trembling but alive. Behind them, the world that had sheltered them dissolved into sparks. 10 Skies sat his horse on a nearby rise, outlined against the inferno. One slow gesture of his hand, and his riders withdrew into the darkness. No pursuit, no final strike. Elias leveled his rifle out of instinct, but something in the chief's eyes froze him. They weren't angry, they were mournful. "You will kill her trying to save her," 10 Skies called across the fire's roar. "That is the only curse worth fearing." Then he turned away, swallowed by smoke. The sudden silence was unbearable. Ayanna clutched Elias's coat, her voice hoarse. "He marked you." Elias looked down. Across his forearm, blood seeped from a shallow cut, no wound he remembered making. The symbol drawn in ash and blood curved like a crescent closing over a star. "What does it mean?" he asked. "It means," she whispered, "your death belongs to him now." By sunrise they'd reached the dry creek bed 2 miles east, hollow-eyed and half-walking. The fire behind them had died, replaced by rising smoke that split the sky in pale ribbons. Elias's hands shook as he poured water from his canteen for Ayanna. She took one sip and pushed it back. "He won't attack again until sunset," she said quietly. "That's his law. He lets the marked man walk one day to beg the earth for mercy." Elias stared at the horizon, bitterness coiling in his chest. "Mercy's for fools." "No," she said. "Mercy's for those who've already lost." He squatted, tracing the strange symbol on his arm with the tip of a knife. The edges stung but didn't fade. "So what happens if he doesn't find us?" Ayanna looked away. "He doesn't need to. The mark bleeds when he's near. You'll know." Elias pressed his sleeve over it, heart pounding harder for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. It wasn't just 10 Skies hunting him anymore. It was something heavier, unseen, hitching a ride in his ribs, the slow, creeping weight of being bound to the same curse that haunted Ayanna. He didn't know it yet, but the bond was already changing him. They sheltered in the skeleton of an old mining shed that afternoon. The air inside tasted of rust and abandonment. Light filtered through broken boards, striping Ayanna's face like cage bars. She slept curled against the wall, exhaustion stealing her usual watchfulness. Elias sat beside her, staring at the mark again. The thin crescent shimmered faintly in the dim light, faint pulses beneath his skin matching the rhythm of his heartbeat. Guilt gnawed deeper, the sense that every kindness he'd shown her was only buying her one more moment inside a story she wasn't supposed to survive. He thought about Mara again, the lavender smell, the sound of her voice saying leave the rifle in the corner tonight. She'd believed a man could live clean. Elias almost laughed. He reached for Ayanna's deer-hide pouch, curious despite himself. Inside, folded with care, was a thread of dark hair bound around a tiny carved tooth. He realized, slow horror spreading through him, that it was human. "Don't touch that." Her voice startled him. She was awake now, eyes wide but unafraid. "It's my mother," she said softly. "She keeps me safe from the dead." "You mean your father?" he murmured. "No," she whispered. "From you." That night, the plain glowed with strange light, the kind that doesn't belong to moon or fire. Elias dreamed he was walking through a fog made of voices, each whispering his name. Ayanna stood ahead of him, holding the carved tooth like a lantern. "You think death chooses?" she asked in the dream. "No," he answered. "I think it remembers." When he woke, he found her gone. He scrambled outside as the dawn cracked orange along the horizon, panic slicing through the fatigue. She stood a few yards away on a ridge, her silhouette small against the world's immensity. "He's close," she said before he could speak. The mark on his arm throbbed like an old wound reopening. "You could leave me," she added. "Let the curse finish its circle." "Maybe I'm tired of circles," Elias muttered. She turned then, tears streaking her soot-stained face, but her voice was calm. "Then you'll have to break it. But to break it, one of us must die." Elias froze, pulse roaring in his ears. That ain't gonna happen. She looked past him instead of at him, her voice almost a whisper. It already is. He didn't understand until later, when the sky darkened again and the drumbeat resumed. They followed the creek south through lands scorched and empty. The ground itself looked wounded. Once, Elias spotted a burned wagon smashed among stones, remnants of settlers who'd crossed this same emptiness chasing salvation and found ghosts instead. Ayanna stopped to gather something from the ashes, a child's tin whistle, melted crooked. She held it silently before slipping it into her pouch. Why keep that? Elias asked. To remember, she said. Every soul the prairie swallows becomes part of its wind. If I forget them, they forget me. He wanted to argue but couldn't. The sky had thickened again, slabs of cloud curling like smoke. The rhythm of his pulse synced with the mark's dull burn. It frightened him how natural it began to feel. Ayanna, he said finally, if this curse, whatever it is, kills me, would it free you? She shook her head. Curses don't free. They bind until something changes. And what changes it? Belief, she said. Or blood. The answer chilled him, because he had neither left to spare. When dusk fell, they found a hollow at the base of an old cottonwood. Elias said he'd stand watch. But he didn't. He sat beside her and waited for the storm to find them. The storm broke without rain, just light and sound without mercy. Thunder cracked so hard the ground screamed. And among it came shapes, half real, half rage. Riders of smoke circled the cottonwood, faces pale as bone dust. Ayanna sat up at once, chanting words Elias could barely breathe around. They're not men, she said. They're his dead. Elias fired blindly into the storm, watching bullets pass through shadows that didn't bleed. The mark on his arm glowed faintly, every beat a sear. It's calling them, Ayanna shouted over the wind. Calling them? The thought hit him like a blow. It wasn't 10 skies chasing him anymore. The curse itself was summoning the forgotten dead, every soul the prairie had eaten. Elias grabbed his knife, carving into the mark, desperate to break the pattern. Stop! Ayanna screamed. If you cut it, you call him faster. But he kept carving until he saw the world flash white, and the face of Mara in the lightning, whispering, "Don't forget mercy." He blinked, and only Ayanna stood before him, holding his bleeding arm. You can't fight it, she said. But maybe you can choose what it takes. The wind died suddenly, leaving them trembling, surrounded by silence that wasn't peace but warning. When dawn came, there was no sound of birds, no trace of 10 skies or his riders, only a thin frost heavy on the ground. Ayanna slept against the roots of the cottonwood, her breathing shallow but steady. Elias wrapped her in his coat and stared at the horizon, wondering how long dawn would hold before the curse drew them back into night. His bleeding arm had turned black around the pattern. The mark pulsed faintly even at rest. He should have felt terror, but there was only weariness and clarity, a sense that death had grown intimate, almost companionable. He remembered Mara's final moments once more, her hand on his cheek, telling him, "You can't bury what you never forgive." He understood now. You could outfight guilt, you could outrun it, but you couldn't outlive it. When Ayanna stirred, she asked softly, "Did you dream?" "No," he said. "Something else dreamed me." She looked toward the east. "Then we go home," she murmured. "Where's that?" "Where the dead are waiting." He frowned. "The canyon?" "Yes." Her tone was calm. "It began there. It will end there." For the first time, Elias didn't argue. He just nodded and they started walking. The journey back to Red Lantern Canyon took 2 days. Each night, fires appeared far off but never came near. It was as if the plane itself was escorting them home. Ayanna grew quieter with every mile, her eyes sinking back into memory. Elias tried to keep talking, useless stories from his youth, jokes that died halfway out of his mouth. "Why'd you save me?" she asked suddenly. He paused. "Because no one saved Mara when they could have." "That's pity," she said firmly. "Not salvation." "Then maybe pity's all I had left." She didn't answer. By the second night, the canyon broke through the fog, its walls glowing white under moonlight. The wind came through it like morning. "He'll be waiting," Ayanna whispered. Elias nodded. Then let's give him a reason to remember us. But inside, his heart beat slower. He felt the curse working its way higher up his arm, through his chest, creeping toward his pulse. He couldn't tell if it was killing him or merging. The idea that his body had become a vessel for Ten Sky's vengeance made him sick, and yet, in a dark, twisted way, he understood it. They were both fathers who'd buried too much love in rage. They reached the canyon floor at sunrise. The world there was hollowed, scorched, full of bones. The same gully where he'd found her years ago looked smaller now, less sacred, more grave. Ayana walked ahead, barefoot, her cloak dragging dust. Elias followed, struggling to hold the rifle steady as fatigue pulled at his vision. The mark burned hot and constant. He could almost hear whispers leaking through it, voices that weren't his. Ayana stopped suddenly. He's here. The air shimmered, bending light like heat above stones. 10 Skies rode out of that shimmer alone, cloak trailing behind, face half painted in ash. He dismounted silently, eyes never leaving Elias. You brought her back, the chief said. You understand what must happen now. I understand too much, Elias replied, voice a rasp. You call it sacrifice. I call it surrender. 10 Skies smiled faintly. We both call it balance. Ayana stepped between them. No. This ends another way. She turned toward Elias. The mark ties you to him. If you bleed by his hand, he inherits your guilt. But if he bleeds by yours, the curse begins again. Elias felt the choice rise before him like a gallows. The canyon's silence waited, patient, eternal. For a long moment, no one moved. The wind died, and the canyon turned blind. Ayana's hair lifted in the still air, glowing faintly under the pale sun. Don't, she whispered. If either of you kills the other, this land won't stop burning. 10 Skies lowered his spear but didn't drop it. The spirits already decided, he said softly. I am only their voice. Elias raised his rifle, shaking. Then maybe the spirits need reminding whose voice is louder. He aimed, but the mark on his arm flared with a searing light that forced him to drop it. The pain was unbearable. Ayana stepped forward, pressing her hands against his arm, her voice clear over the wailing wind. Give it to me, she said. I can take it back. No. Elias gasped. It'll kill you. It'll end the circle. Before he could stop her, she whispered a string of words he didn't know, pressing her palm against the mark. The light flickered, shifted, then transferred, running up her arm like fire. She screamed once, then fell to her knees, breathing hard. The crescent on Elias's skin faded to scars. On hers, the same mark burned bright. 10 Skies cried out, not in victory, but in grief. My daughter, 10 Skies said, voice trembling, you were meant to lead our dead, not join them. Ayana looked up, her voice faint but firm. Then perhaps they will listen to me better because I walk with them. He knelt beside her, every sternness stripped from his face. I wanted to spare you. You wanted to keep me. Her hand reached toward him, trembling. Let me go, father. Elias turned away, giving them silence. This was not his moment, it was theirs. He stared up at the canyon rim where sunlight started to bleed through the haze, strange and soothing. Behind him, 10 Skies whispered something in their language, a prayer or farewell, and when Elias turned back, the chief had pressed his palm against Ayana's forehead. The white paint running down his cheek mixed with tears. Ayana smiled faintly. Balance, she murmured. Her body went still. The air changed, as if the canyon exhaled for the first time in centuries. Fire dying, ghosts whispering farewell through the dust. 10 Skies bowed his head, then looked at Elias. Her peace is your burden now. Elias wanted to speak, to rage or thank or curse, but all he managed was a single truth. I'll carry it. When it was finished, 10 Skies vanished into the red horizon. No smoke, no trace, just wind and silence. Elias buried Ayana beneath the cottonwood at the canyon's mouth, where the sunlight hit first each morning. He placed her pouch beside the grave, along with the melted whistle and the carved tooth. When he rose, he felt older than death itself, but the mark on his arm no longer burned. It was only a scar, crooked, imperfect human. He mounted his mule, turned east, and rode until the canyon shrank behind him like a wound scabbing over. By the time night came, he found himself near the same ridge where it had all begun. The stars burned low, quiet watchers of every sin and mercy alike. Elias whispered a final prayer the way men sometimes do when they're unsure who's listening. Asterisk, let me keep remembering. Don't let her fade. Asterisk, a gust of wind brushed past him then, carrying just a hint of her voice, half wind, half memory, saying, asterisk, you broke the circle. Keep walking. Asterisk, he smiled through the ache of everything lost. The horizon opened, rich with color. Somewhere beyond it waited peace. Or perhaps just another story needing someone to carry it.